What is the deepest internet rabbit hole you've ever fallen into? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the Vancher channel. Also, please share your thoughts on this video in the comments. Let's get started. Story 1. There was a paperboy kidnapped a route over from my paper route in the mid-80s. I've spent a lot of time reading about him to the point that I've made comments on Reddit and have been contacted by others wanting to interview me about it. Story 2. Once I spent 6 hours researching how people accidentally join cults, and by the end I was like, yeah, I get how it happens. Answer. This is hilarious. I used to work for a company owned by Scientologists. I knew what I was getting myself into. I ended up staying there for a long time, and they paid for my graphic design stuff. But then it got to the point, and we were forced to go to self-help talks, and then it got weirder when they turned an old office into a library, and we had to pick a book and write a small report on it weekly. I was kind of in a lucky position that I traveled a lot, but it was always with the owner's daughter. She had made the joke about being indoctrinated a few times, but I always glanced over it. Now I think back and I wonder how much indoctrination was going on even outside of me. Needless to say, cults are absolutely fascinating things. Story 3. I once spent 3 days reading about abandoned Disney projects, like the whole history of Discovery Island and River Country. By the end, I felt like a ghost employee from 1970. Story 4. Deaths on MT Everest. Started as a curious click on a random article, then got pulled into all the documentaries and articles. It's horrifying. Story 5. Was in a Facebook group about loving retro video games, and someone made a relevant post that was also memorializing someone who had committed tragic end. I went on the person's Facebook page and spent 3 hours learning about the life and passing of a complete stranger on the other side of the country from me, and I was crying, yo. Edit, it's not anyone famous, so I will be keeping their privacy. Sorry, guys. Although the similar stories you've shared have been very touching. Answer, similar. But the person I ended up learning all about was the most prolific ragtime piano player and improvisers of the modern era, or really, possibly ever. Absolute savant. He was in a car accident, I believe, right before COVID, and ended up with both brain damage as well as paralysis, completely destroying his ability to play piano. Absolutely devastating. I still look him up every once in a while to see if there's any update to his recovery, but fudge, it makes me so sad. Edit for more info from replies, Tom Breer. Car accident was 2016. He can still play some with his left hand and attend house concerts. Was given a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2023. His most famous video. A lesser-known Tom Breyer video that's one of my faves. Oh hey, look, I fell into the hole again and can't stop recommending Tom Breyer videos. Story 6. Opened YouTube to check one recipe. 4 hours later, I'm watching a guy build a pool in the jungle with a stick. Story 7. Sovereign citizens. It all started with either seeing or taking a picture of a strange license plate, and next thing you know, I'm learning all about this crazy movement that I had never heard about. I've forgotten most of it, but I remember there was a big thing about how if the American flag has the yellow fringes on it, it's not a real flag, and it represents maritime law. And that wasn't even the craziest part. Answer, every once in a while I'll get a video recommended and go down the rabbit hole to see if there are any new bangers. Soft-tits are sad. Some of them are very genuine in their beliefs, and some are extreme libertarians that are either grasping at straws or just trying to be such a pain in the A that the system gives up and lets them do whatever they want. I feel bad for the people who are detached from reality and the people who have to deal with them. Story 8. A woman once got into an Uber with me. We chatted, and when she left, she told me her first name and her place of work and said, come find me. Looking her up felt like stalking her since she didn't have much of an internet presence. Found out why pretty soon. Turns out she was a Columbine shooting survivor. Her name was in the shooter's journal. I even ran across a cached copy of a deleted Tumblr blog that had been tracking all of the girls in that journal. Were they married? How many kids? Where they lived? Truly some of the creepiest shoot I've seen on the internet about real people. Worst part is, I could never tell her I knew all of this. Story 9. Last year, I tripped over a picture of a completely destroyed porta potty from the gathering of juggalos here on Reddit. And I remember a bit about ICP from my youth, had never been a fan, honestly had never really given it much thought, but fell into this entire rabbit hole of researching their whole thing. My girlfriend still gives me hell about it. For days, she'd walk into the room and I'd be scrolling, and she'd be like, are you still reading about the juggalos? I was. That was a weird or so days. Answer. The juggalos get made fun of a lot online, but they're an extremely inclusive and welcoming subculture. My wife is from Detroit and was not a juggalo, but she does have a certain fondness for them being active in the punk intense hip-hop horrorcore scene when she was in high school. The other kids at her school were snobby rich kids who would never listen to any of that kind of music, so she gravitated toward the alternative kids, some of whom were juggalos, because they were actually nice to her. She gets teary-eyed talking about them. It's really sweet, and a Faygo candle is one of her prized possessions. Story 10. A young woman on Reddit said she was going to off herself. Using her post history, I figured out where she lived, where she worked, called and spoke to someone who knew her IRL. They gave me the name of her boyfriend, found his number. Turns out that he had broken up with her, but still cared, so he went over and stopped her. I was up all night. This was all under a different username from the one I currently use. Story 11. I spent like 2 weeks just learning about cephalopods. They're freaky little aliens with unsettling superpowers. Answer, they are really incredible, particularly octopus. The fact that they show such immense intelligence like hunting strategies and tool use, while having lifespans of average 2 years, is completely mind-boggling. These are learned behaviors, not instincts they are born with. I'm convinced they have types of intelligence that humans can't even comprehend because we don't have it. I feel the same about whales. Story 12. Cicada 3301. Someone or some group posted a string of highly complex puzzles to scout people with the intelligence to solve them. Really interesting stuff. Story 13. I tripped into this weird collection of stories about strange staircases in the woods that you should never ever touch or step on, weird sightings and strange deaths in the wilderness. It was captivating. I haven't seen it in so long. Story 14. Watching one episode of Behind the Music on YouTube during the lockdown and falling into the 80s UK pop music scene and becoming a fan of so many different artists and seeing who else was involved in a scene. Story 15. A few years ago, I ended up somehow on a Wikipedia list of all U.S. federal prisons. That ended up with me going to every individual site for each prison and seeing who the famous people who had ever been there were. Then, reading up on each individual. It was a huge rabbit hole, but very interesting. Note, there are a lot of us federal prisons, and each one has numerous people listed. It took a while. Answer, I, on occasion, would somehow end up on the ADX Florence Wikipedia. Always interesting who ended up there and why. Then last year we drove from Colorado Springs to Pagosa Springs, and sure enough, we ended up driving through Florence, Colorado. It was a weird feeling, knowing that much evil was a few miles away. The rest of the family got a good education session about the prison after we drove by. Story 16. I was hungover and a real old film was on network TV like Golden Era Black-White. I'm talking. In that film was an eye-catching actress named Loretta Young. The story about her and her infidelity incident, particularly its after effect with Clark Gable, is fudge wild. All because I was too lazy to reach for my remote and change the channel. Answer, wife and I were tripping on mushrooms on Christmas morning, and we fell asleep for a bit after dosing. We woke up to the movie The Family Man with Nick Cage. I was immediately hooked because it has Kate Walsh, and she is half in it. We started watching it and then really kind of melted down. When the fog cleared and we were in the couch, lock stage of being, I look over and a scene was playing that we had already watched. It was fudge weird. Like, we know we are tripping, but what the fudge happened? We both confirmed that we had never watched the movie before and kind of just sat there for a minute rewatching the movie. I got up to make some food, and when I came back out, it was happening again. The same scene was playing. It took me 2 or 3 more tries to figure it out. Without spoiling the movie, watch it tripping, it is fun. The plot revolves a bit around what was happening, and the goddamn thing was on repeat on the channel we were watching, like they do with A Christmas Story. So, when we fell asleep, we probably heard some of the scenes subconsciously. Then when we really got tripping, it had ended and started over. And then time dilation when I was cooking caused me to take longer than normal at something quick, and the movie had restarted again. It was really creepy at first, but fudge hilarious in the end. We never changed the channel the entire day. Story 17. Do not go and read any article, any at all, on TV tropes. I have spent hours clicking open a new tab and only stopped because I got hungry. Story 18. I once ended up putting together the entire lore of Doctor Who because of a Tumblr post of 10th and Rose fan art. Story 19. On the brink of a religious psychosis, was reading and studying hours and hours every day 4 weeks, trying to figure out whether God exists and I'm going to hell. Answer. I went down a vicious cycle of this, still pops up sometimes, where I eventually realized that it won't matter what I choose, because there's always a different religion that will condemn me for not choosing it. Edit because words are hard. I do not mean most religions have this ideology, only that you are bound to fail in escaping hell from all religions, simply because there is more than one with that belief. Story 20. I once spent a long weekend looking into the theory online that rock musician Andrew WK was an industry plant, that he was really a character of an energetic rock star performed by an actor, and that he had been replaced. It didn't help that although he almost always wore his uniform of filthy white shirt and pants, his appearance has varied over the years based on hair and beard length. And that one time years before, I had seen pictures of what looked to be an Andrew WK cosplayer at an event and was confused. I've never owned an album of his and have only heard a few of his singles. Story 21. I wanted to learn about automobile suspension. Next thing you know, it's 4 a.m. and I am an expert on suspension geometry, spring rates, spindles, valving, dampening, coilovers, control arms, camber plates, toe, etc., etc. It was an incredibly fascinating rabbit hole. Story 22. Found a Twitter post of someone asking for leads on the author of an abandoned book. It related to a town in Ireland, so I tried to find a local news outlet to possibly contact. I got distracted by the obituaries on their website and came across one that had a video link that was about to start streaming. And that's how I ended up watching a random Irish grandma's funeral service for an hour. Story 23. A few years ago, I stumbled into a forgotten corner of the web while trying to find old NASA live stream archives. One link led to a Japanese FTP site that was still online, filled with folders labeled in strange shorthand like STS-105X and Orbital Debrief 9099. Inside were grainy videos and audio logs that seemed real, NASA insignias, launch chatter, and coordinates. But none of the missions matched anything public. Some of the clips even had what looked like internal commentary about visual interference and foreign telemetry signatures. The deeper I dug, the more the timestamps overlapped with actual shuttle missions. Then one day the whole server vanished, replaced with a 403 error page that had a single blinking underscore in the corner like a command prompt waiting for input. To this day, I've never found anyone who's seen it or heard of it. Even the Wayback Machine skips over it like it was never there. I don't know what I found. Maybe some elaborate hoax. But every so often, I get the urge to search those mission codes again. Nothing ever comes up, but every few months, my search history still shows STS-115X sitting there, even when I know I didn't type it. Answer. Reminded me of the time many years ago when some guy on Reddit posted video from his home telescope. That was clearly real. The video had aberrations from the atmosphere and the optics, and showed what was obviously a gigantic space-based telescope. This was long before the James Webb, and it wasn't the Hubble, although it looked similar. A few hours later, he posts a video of black helicopters flying over his house. Then, no more posts. When I went back to look for the thread the next day, gone from everywhere on the web. Story 24. Okay, I finally have a place to talk about this. I stumbled upon a YouTube video about an entire family that was basically in forbidden topic cesspool. Unbelievable amounts of abuse of all kinds had been taking place within this family for multiple generations that went on until 2012. It was honestly one of the most disgusting and abhorrent things I'd ever learned about. What's even fudge weirder is, even after this family was discovered, which took decades because they lived out in the middle of nowhere and were isolated from society, multiple family members had active Instagram and social media accounts that were public with pictures. Like, I went down an entire rabbit hole of at least 10-15 different family members' Instagram accounts. Some even had posts with disturbing comments toward each other. I had the thought that these could have been faked, but it was weird that a lot of the pictures uploaded weren't anywhere else online. It was also already proven that an account on TikTok made by a younger member was legitimate. And everything I was finding myself through these social media accounts were extremely bizarre and sad. It's been a while since I came across this, so I may have a few details backwards, but I believe this was the Colt family, known as the Colt Clan Forbidden Topic case, and Colt is not their real name. The only reason I went down the rabbit hole of their social media was after finding a random post online that had doxed their real name. The entire thing still feels like a fever dream. It was so disturbing. Story 25. Finding the CIA's archives of MKUltra and related 60s, 70s weird shoot program documents was probably the deepest I've ever gotten. There's thousands upon thousands of pages of just the craziest shoot ever, and it's official. Story 26. Holy shoot! I have one for this. I had some expired Triscuit crackers. I wanted to know if I could still eat them with some non-expired dip. So I typed it into Google, and one of the top hits is this Shop Savvy site that's all AI generated, but the other hits are similar. Bargain Boxed, Discover Real Food in Texas. They're all AI generated blog spam, all built on a very similar template, and all of them are populated with links to other AI generated sites like this. I scraped through a bunch of the links and found that there are more than a dozen different domains in this ring, all linking to each other to game the search results and get top SEO. But I can't figure out why. They aren't running ads and don't have affiliate links. Sourdough Symphony, Trivial Bites, My Kitchen, Hacks, Ingredient Savvy, Grain-Free Goodness, all of them using AI-generated text and images, all of them linking to each other. Eventually, I dug into the owners and figured out that they're linked to a company called Ashfount Investments. But that site is also all AI-generated. All the members are stock photos. It's all fake, all the way down. All of this to tell me if my Triscuits go bad, seemingly. If anyone has the slightest idea what the purpose behind these sites is, other than contributing further to the dead internet, please let me know. Answer: okay, so I tried to find any of these companies, but all their sites have bad gateways or server issues. But I found a site for someone named Sebastian Sauerborn, whose site advertises cross-border tax consulting for sovereign clients. Also looks like it was written by AI. But at the bottom of his page, it says he's active in regenerative agriculture and food startups through Ashfount Investments in Austin, TX, which has a link to the defunct same site as all the others. He also has a LinkedIn page that says he's the co-founder chairman of Ashfount. On the Ashfount LinkedIn page, they're described as a small, UK-based and family-owned investment company. The firm builds US-based businesses in the regenerative food systems and farm space. Our investment strategy is to create a diverse portfolio of enterprises, ranging from actual farms and ranches to media and e-commerce companies. Their LinkedIn has an Edinburgh address. So I tried to look them up using the UK's Financial Services Register, but it didn't return any results. Nothing returned on the US Investment Advisor Public Disclosure Register. Looks like I'm going down this rabbit hole now. Story 27. Man, when I was a teenager, I got so into research chemicals, but without any real access to them aside from clonazepam and Dexim until uni. I would stay up all night reading about stimulants, psychedelics, opioids, benzos, dissociatives, etc. And because I didn't have access, I just imagined what it was like to be on them. Really got it into my head that using them would make me a better person. Only years later, and after I finally was able to get my hands on a variety of them, did I realize they were an escape, a sort of performative way to be cool and above others. Yeah, right. It did teach me I was good at reading and summarizing research, though, and I now am a psychologist CBT therapist. Go figure. Answer: you really weren't missing out on anything. They're not research chemicals because they're niche and only cool people know about them. It's because they were never cool enough to be popularized or researched, and most of them have insane unknown side effects, like the receptor agonists that don't unbind, or the ones that destroy serotonergic pathways are the worst, or if you're lucky, they're carcinogenic. Anyway, hope you're far away from that substance thing now. It's the best way to be. And congrats on your career. Story 28. About 8 years ago, I read about how Chinese immigrants started and transformed the way Americans ate. These were, in essence, the first fast food establishments during the building of the first transcontinental railroad. It turned into such an interest that I've almost perfected the techniques, cookware, and the ingredients used to make the most popular Chinese takeout items. Story 29. In the pits of Reddit, I had this one guy talking about his apocalypse plan is to just breed and feed on rabbits endlessly. And then somehow I found out that they've tried that, and a few generations in, you get like no nutrition from the new rabbits or something. Story 30. I came across this legend about the Green Children of Woolpit and starting looking into how they had came to New England in the 12th century speaking an unknown language from a mysterious hidden village. Crazy stuff. Story 31. Hindenburg trials. So many bad people that lead to so many more bad people that lead to even more bad people. Story 32. Godzilla. The history, philosophy, production methods, scripts, actors, etc. I've been in this hole literally as long as I can remember, and I don't see myself getting out anytime soon. The only movies and shows I haven't seen are the ones that were never made, but I found the unfinished scripts and read them online. When you know about Godzilla versus Satan, you're living in this hole now. Story 33. I once spent a couple of hours reading connected Reddit threads about a guy who used to be a park ranger, I think, and talked about seeing staircases in the woods and some other creepy things that happened, usually when someone had seen the stairs. I wish I could remember or the sub it was in because it was an interesting read. Story 34. Holy shoot, am I ever the queen of rabbit hole searches? The list of lists on Wikipedia is my go-to. I don't know where to start. Missing people, mysteries, historical coincidences, most famous photos of all time, natural disasters, shipwrecks, colonization, empires, conspiracies. I could go on. Story 35. The history of Rosicrucianism. It's fascinating. Basically, some fellow wrote a couple of books in the early 17th century of what we today would call utopian science fiction. It purported to be manifestos describing a secret society of enlightened masters working secretly to create an esoteric science for the betterment of humanity. Needless to say, this was completely invented by the writer, but it found a ready audience of people who very much wanted to believe it was true, and an endless stream of charlatans claiming to be those esoteric masters. Eventually, the authorities in various places became alarmed. The authorities never liked the notion of secret societies expressly working on social change, particularly in an era of religious upheaval, and the manifestos were larded with religious and Kabbalistic ideas. And they started to crack down on these Rosicrucians, which just had the effect of convincing the public that the esoteric masters actually existed. Perhaps the most bizarre and influential outcome, the so-called Invisible College of Thinkers and Scientists in England, was inspired by this, which eventually morphed into the Royal Society, with luminaries like Sir Isaac Newton at the helm. In other words, in some ways, simply wishing something to exist actually made something like it exist in reality, as the Royal College had tremendous influence on the actual and not imaginary history of science. It is amazing how much the early participants were into religious mysticism, alchemy, and the like, as well as what we would now call science, Newton in particular. Indeed, originally there was little to differentiate a natural philosopher from a good old-fashioned alchemist or magician or esoteric master, and it is interesting how that separation came to exist. Something ongoing in this era, namely that science, as it came to be known eventually, was based on a methodology that emphasized communication of information and repeatable results rather than hidden or esoteric knowledge, and as a consequence proved to be more useful. The notion of Rosicrucianism also, of course, gave birth to numerous societies bearing that name, all claiming descent from the original manifestos and leaning more on the esoteric and mystic side. Perhaps the original manifestos are truly among the most influential secular works of fiction ever. Story 36. Read an article 8 years ago on quantum mechanics, which led me to QED, which led me to learning about Dr. Feynman's safe-cracking ability. Not to brag, but I can now solve both time-dependent and independent Schrödinger equations and break into pretty much anything. Story 37. The 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami. I had never even heard of the word tsunami. I searched everything I could about tsunamis, the huge amount of deaths in the path of overwhelming destruction. I still regularly search for new information or documentaries. Story 38, Cicada 3301. Got interested in 2020, joined the community, and 2 years later, I was giving a talk at the world's largest hacking conference about it. I tell people, Cicada is different than most rabbit holes because you end up finding a wonderland where you can engage with so many different aspects and elements. Story 39. I don't remember how I stumbled across it, but I got into those snake egg hatching videos by Snake Discovery, and it led me down the rabbit hole of reptile keeping. I had never touched a snake in my life. I've had a part-time side job at the zoo doing reptile presentations for 5 years now because of it. LOL. Story 40. A girl I went to high school with who was going through a mental health crisis or a substances-induced psychosis. She would live stream for hours, and the things she would say and do were crazy. I watched everything in shock and horror and got so invested. It went on for months, and then she would disappear and come back. It's been silenced for about a year now, and I wonder how she's doing. I researched her and found some court records as well. I hope she's getting better. Story 41. I found a video of Letterman interviewing Max Headroom that I couldn't stop watching. Letterman could kind of interview anyone, from Jay-Z to Al Gore, but he just couldn't figure out the rhythm of this interview. I spent hours and hours trying to figure out the satire behind Max Headroom, and after that, because there is so much misinformation across the internet from Americans across decades not realizing it was a character making fun of them. It got very dark very quickly. Story 42. Hermit crabs. I don't own or desire to own a hermit crab, But one day I stumbled across hermit crab care information by accident and couldn't stop reading. I spent the entire day on this. I eventually ended up on some blog detailing what happened when a guy, apparently well-known in the hermit crab-keeping hobby forms, passed away, and how they handled finding care for his massive amount of pet hermit crabs after. The most interesting thing I learned is that you have to be careful with a hermit crab that has just molted. If they're in a tank with multiple hermit crabs eat their shed skin to regain the nutrients. If the newly molted crab runs into others while the smell of shed skin is still on it, the others will go, "Oh yay, tasty shed skin," and eat it. They actually make a special scent remover you can wash your crab in to remedy this. Story 43. Deep on Operation Paperclip, the rest of the Nazis fleeing to Argentina. Also deep into the Bigfoot cryptid thing. Story 44. Probably the Elisa Lam case. So many details, so many things that seem borderline impossible. That initial elevator video is just so compelling. Sadly, after all the research, I'm pretty convinced the answer is that she simply had a mental break and took her own life. Story 45. The Israel lobby and how it actually exists, yet it feels like we're not supposed to acknowledge how the Israeli embassy Hadass links to UK political parties. The Anti-Defamation League's pro-apartheid work in South Africa, Jonathan Pollard, Zelman Shapiro. I did my journalism dissertation about how the media covers Israel and Palestine, so I've done a lot of reading about this. Story 46. Who really were the mysterious sea peoples blamed for the late Bronze Age collapse in the Mediterranean area? Story 47. UAP and government disinformation campaigns and cover-ups. The government literally conducted a disinformation operation in which they intentionally created a cultural stigma against UFO sightings and reports so that we'd all believe that anyone who talked about it or had experiences were crazy. They even infiltrated UFO groups to feed them misleading information. And now they are trying to reverse it by rebranding it UAP and admitting they are real. They are regularly interacting with our Navy and Air Force in restricted airspace in 2020 and have been for years, and have even somehow turned our nukes on and off when hovering above them at every nuclear silo. As in, began the launch countdown, then turned it off last minute during the Cold War. This has also occurred at Russia's nuclear sites. The flying machines that are piloted seem to defy the laws of physics as we understand them, and our government stated aren't from here. They aren't ours, and no other country could have this kind of tech. As in, huge flying machines that are shaped like a cigar, saucer, or triangle with no visible means of propulsion, hypersonic speeds, instantaneous acceleration and deceleration, stopping instantaneously and hovering in midair, making 90-degree turns instantaneously, are silent when flying, can move through air, plunge into the oceans, and move through water, then come back up without hindrance, have stealth characteristics, some emit an electrostatic charge surrounding the machine, etc. In one instance, an Air Force pilot reported a large cigar-shaped vehicle that was playing cat and mouse with him and exhibiting the above characteristics seemed to disappear, only to reappear at his secret rendezvous location in the air, where he had planned on heading next without communication. Many Air Force pilots have stated they saw occupants in the craft, and they were not human. Even fudge weirder, though, is that a very large number of witnesses say they did see human-looking occupants on board, but much taller than people, Nordic-looking, always the same description, alongside non-human occupants. Some researchers have speculated that this could mean some of the vehicles are time travelers from the future, and it's possible the non-human beings are basically biological robots they built. Would explain why being told about future events telepathically, apparently they have an understanding of consciousness we don't yet, and experiencing strange effects with time is a very common thread among people who report interactions. Almost every country that has the resources has had a task force that tracks and studies the UFOs for decades. It's a global phenomenon. That's insane, and no one is really talking about it. In the last congressional hearing on UAP in 2024, that you can watch on YouTube, military veterans and intelligence officials such as Ryan Graves and David Grush stated under oath that there exist reverse engineering programs with material from retrieval programs that operated at UFO crash sites, and that the UFOs are not of this earth. They also changed the wording from extraterrestrials to non-human intelligences because they believe the phenomenon may be hyperdimensional as opposed to extraterrestrial. A slow drip disclosure started in June 2021 with the NYT Times piece. The stated concern with being even more forthcoming than they have is public panic and societal destabilization. The Pentagon released actual footage, although definitely not their best footage, and everyone is acting like what was in those videos is normal. It's crazy. I was actually shocked at how much real scientific evidence there was on this topic. Thousands and thousands of extremely trustworthy people have reported these experiences, including astronauts, and including experiences that involve multiple witnesses at once, of the first through fourth kind. Confirmation of the eyewitness reports with high-level radar and other physical tools, including scientific analysis of material from crash sites that has been made public by a professor at Stanford University who stated they were not made on Earth, and studies on the patterns of their interactions with us that go back to ancient times, including declassified documents. A related rabbit hole is the connection between the occult and the people that ran the American and Russian space programs, as well as the occult practices of people who have genius insights that lead to new technologies and new scientific paradigms in general. Jack Parsons was a rocket scientist that founded the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and was a devotee of Aleister Crowley. What's weird is the Russians also had a Soviet space program led by people that had similar beliefs and also engaged in similar occult practices that paralleled the American space program. I went down that rabbit hole after reading American Cosmic, which was written by someone that was very much an atheist when it comes to this stuff, who was shocked at what she discovered. Her name is Diana Pasulka. She's talked about her book and podcasts. The proven disinformation campaign that our government has admitted they engaged in, that this topic is only believed by crazies, has worked so well that most people are not open to really looking at the evidence. In American Cosmic, the author claims that our current scientific paradigm of naturalism, materialism, with its stigma of certain topics like UAP and parapsychology, is not believed by the people at the highest level of various government programs, nor is it believed by the top scientists of top universities, the kind of scientists who work on breakthrough science and technology, nor the scientists that requested a pseudonym for her book, because their work leads to tech we don't want other countries or companies to develop first. The paradigm they have of reality, the one they use, is very different and would be mocked by mainstream society. The current dominant paradigm in science is actually not what the rational and intelligent people at the top believe, unlike what we are led to think by public figures like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Brian Greene. On that note, people act like the CIA's remote viewing program was just this silly, misguided, and pointless operation the CIA managed for over 20 years, but didn't actually work, and they didn't realize, LOL. Their declassified documents clearly show it did. Just because Stargate ended after 2 decades doesn't mean one with a different name didn't take its place. Reality is a whole lot weirder and a lot more interesting than people want to realize. Story 48. Recently, I've been watching videos and documentaries about war and terror, America war crimes and the Taliban, Osama bin Laden and other terrorist organizations, also Russia-Chechen war, Vietnam War, and Iraq invasion. Fun fact, Mom, America funded as rabbit hole is deep. Story 49. Beekeeper pulling hive out of people's walls. When I had COVID, I was watching this dude on YouTube, and next thing I know, it's 9 HRs later. Very interesting stuff. Story 50. 4chan unironically made me racist, lol. I've since been rehabilitated trying to understand people and the world better and join class unity in the DSA. Story 51. I was on TikTok a few months ago, and I came across an Astro World video. I never knew exactly what happened, but I knew what happened. Anyways, as I saw that video in the search, it said something about another video. I clicked it, obviously. I set an app limit on my phone for most of my social media apps because if I didn't, I'd be on it all day. I was so deep, my phone closed the app because I spent too much time on TT. Turns out I was in that rabbit hole for 5 whole hours. RIP to all the victims involved. It's actually disturbing and devastating. Story 52. K-pop sasaengs. Holy crap, people. When they get super obsessed with their idols or super crazy and like a cult, the amount of stuff I found made me feel like I touched the dark web, and I've never even been in the dark web. There are a lot of adult sasaengs, but a lot of them are kids. It's a scary rabbit hole. Story 53. Nutty Putty Cave Disaster. I probably read every article that was ever written about it at this point. Story 54. I'm a bone marrow transplant nurse at a cancer center at an East Coast U.S. University Hospital. Over the last 8 years, I have saved the zip codes of almost every patient I have taken care of and cross-referenced those locations with potential environmental pollutants they may have been exposed to, and when possible, the businesses in those locations that introduce those pollutants into the environment. Story 55. Went down a 2-hour rabbit hole on Yankee Doodle Dandy, movie by George M. Cohan. Reason for this being, I heard vaguely about James Cagney from an elective class, music of Broadway, during our lesson on George M. Cohan, and being a Cuphead fan, I wanted to see if he was the inspiration for Cagney Carnation. Then I discovered the name Joan Leslie under his A's as a Gumball fan. I remembered Cagney is a flower, and so is Leslie Ann. Then I proceed to spend way too much time looking through every name on the Wikipedia page for more names of plant characters. Second place goes to my rabbit holes, where I spent so much time researching chromosomal abnormalities. BC genetics is a big interest of mine. Story 56. How Roy from Siegfried and Roy died many years ago and was replaced with a Roy look-alike, which resulted in that Roy look-alike being attacked. Maybe eliminate too, I forgot. Story 57. It's been a long time, but way back in the early days of the World Wide Web, 97 to 98, there was a site called Web Roulette. You'd go to the site, press refresh, and you'd be presented with 5 completely random URLs. Most of them were random documents, the kind of stuff you'd find on the deep web these days. Mostly just data or papers on stuff that anybody not involved would be incredibly confused about. Or random business websites, but every once in a while you'd be presented with a hidden gem. One morning in computer class, I clicked refresh and was presented with a link to a site on a web ring. A bunch of sites associated with the same thing and linked together, focused on a jihad, www.jihad.net, to destroy Barney the dinosaur. It was a bunch of stories, poems, text-based RPGs, and original artwork focused around Barney as an evil entity out to destroy our children. One of my personal favorites was a parody of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven called The Barney. It's been almost 30 years and I still swing by from time to time to see if there's new content. Edit. The site is www.jihad.net. Add the dots. Reddit edited out the link for some reason. Don't worry, it's safe. Pretty sure they've kept the URL registered to prevent it from falling into nefarious hands. Story 58. Reading all the Reddit posts from the guy who asked if he should try heroin just for fun and to prove it's not actually that addictive, and then became a full-on heroin addict with years worth of posts documenting his downfall and addiction. Ironically enough, the best unintentional anti-substances campaign ever. Story 59. Ancient civilizations. There is basically nothing that could convince me that human life hasn't been almost completely wiped off the face of the earth multiple times. From the stories of the global floods across basically all of the continents. So many ancient civilizations with stories of their earlier people coming out of the ground after catastrophe. You look at places in India, the wind caves in the Dakotas. There's just too much to deny the fact that there is more or was more going on than we are willing to admit. I rationalize it to myself like this. If you are at home and there is a storm or a tornado, you tell your children it's going to be okay, but you never admit how much danger they're in. If the government or deep state knows that we could get wiped out by an asteroid, they would just act like it's not serious or the probability is very low while preparing to get themselves underground. The regular citizen is never aware of how much jeopardy we are in, because of course, why would we toe the line and follow the rules if the world could end tomorrow? Story 60. Dissociative identity disorder, DID. I followed this girl that claimed to have it and was amazed by the human mind, how it could shelter you from childhood trauma. Turned out she was faking it, though. I guess it was too good to be true, that kids can imagine an entire community when there is a lack of that in their real lives. Story 61. Brigham Young versus Sidney Stranger, or Rigdon, or whoever it was. Edit. It was Brigham Young against Sidney Rigdon, with James Strang up north also making a claim. Thank you, Jimmy Wales. Story 62. Quantum mechanics and physics. It's movement in different fields webs. The movement in a field determines what we call that particle or wave. That light is like oil at time and it's pure kinetic energy, meaning it has no standing mass. That my brain is melting with this new information because I'm too stubborn to math, so now I'm like I can't go any further without at least understanding math and my brain is melting. Like what determines the fields? Like what? Now black holes are on my list of things that make my stomach flip thinking about the list doesn't make sense or have any logic behind it. If you're really curious about my list, it's sea stars, jellyfish, long worms chilling at the bottom of the ocean, gooey ducks, some species of mushrooms, and otters. So black holes are my newest addition to that list. Story 63. I stumbled onto a Reddit post about the darkest, most heinous, hard-to-read Wikipedia articles a couple weeks ago. As someone who doesn't watch horror movies or even much of the news and refuses to watch the crime shows my wife watches because I don't like to even for a minute think of the evil people that are out there, it was a very bad 30 minutes or so before I had to put it down and try to forget it. Story 64. Probably looking into the lives of the victims of airplane disasters. I remember having a particular fixation on that flight who was taken down by the Russian army, allegedly, back in 2014. Quite morbid, but yeah, I like plane stuff in general too. Story 65. Prenatalism. It's mostly great replacement theory types who think a woman's job is to be a trad wife who makes tons of white babies. Story 66. I spent a good long time searching for a book that was always brought up on this sub during the scariest books you've ever read threads. When I decided to go to sub for books like that, I needed to find the original post to show them, and found there isn't a book, but a years-long and multi-sub web of alternative tastes posting about dog breath. I asked real people about that book. I interacted with the guy, thinking we were uncovering a lost creepy book together. A literary version of the evil farming game, if you will. Ended up feeling like the people who learned the game where you secretly play as a pedophile and you help him find a kid was actually real instead. Story 67. I was weirdly engrossed in the case of the guy that eliminated his wife and 2 daughters, Chris Watts. Based on the evidence in the initial few months, I thought he did it, but I argued there was a chance his story of his wife eliminate the girls was true. Well, he definitely later confessed he eliminated them all, and any gray area I was arguing was out the window, so I had spent months of useless speculating in defense of this horrible person. Super cool. I think I was biased because I was a new father at the time and could not even fathom ever harming my kids as a dad. Pretty cringe when I look back on it, even if my motive was finding the truth. Story 68. I used to work nights at a low workload job, so when I got done what I needed to do, I'd sit there for hours and research rock bands, then research which bands inspired them, read all the articles and interviews I could find, and just get deeper and deeper into it. This was around 2009, 2010, pre-Spotify and the early days of YouTube, so it was a lot more of a treasure hunt. Found a lot of cool music and obscure articles, local university shows from huge names that were up-and-comers at the time, GeoCities and Yahoo fan sites, stuff that may or may not even exist outside of the Wayback Machine anymore. Story 69. Motorcycle clubs and the insane influence they have in Ontario and Quebec, Canada. I rarely see them or think about them, but once I started learning it was a 3-week binge fest that led to book reading and documentaries. I had no idea how many were here and how powerful they are. Story 70. MK Ultra goes a lot deeper than people think. Secret shady government initiatives was just one part of it. Story 71. There is a YouTuber named Amberlynn Reed. I fell down that rabbit hole about 7 and 8 years ago, and unfortunately I have yet to escape. Story 72. I started to wonder why the human body treats food like a disease and what histamines are. 4 hours later, I realized I know less now. Story 73. Fun facts about the human body. My favorite one is that on average, each ejaculation contains about 15 terabytes of information. Also that you can always see your nose, your brain just edits it out of your vision. Story 74. In recent years, probably the Creepshow art drama. If you were terminally online during the COVID just post-lockdown era, you probably heard that a YouTuber was outed for being a 4chan, well, lolcow, which is basically 4chan but with mean girls instead of incels, user and a stalker. She'd managed to make a lot of acquaintances in the commentary space, so virtually every commentary YouTuber had to cover it. What you might not know is that this drama was the direct result of another YouTuber, Toby, making a call-out video on Creepshow art over a year prior that snowballed into several dramas that were all interconnected. Toby's call-out video was actually all right, but it turned out to be a fleeting moment of rationality for her, as she was deeply volatile and reactionary otherwise. Even so, she can't have foreseen how that video indirectly lead to Creepshow actually being exposed as a stalker. Cecil McFly has a very helpful video condensing the entire 2 or so years worth of bullshit. If any of you have 4 hours to spare or need some low-stakes bullshit to listen to while you're working. I'm just going to clarify here that Shannon's lolcow use was less about being on the website and more about the stuff she said there. She talked about a lot of YouTubers she was acquainted and even friends with, wove a whole tissue of lies about Peaches and Emily, and occasionally used the odd slur or two. People kind of forgot about the lolcow stuff once the stalker allegations came out. Story 75. I've watched multiple YouTube videos about a 4chan user in Germany called Krustanon who hadn't showered or cleaned his room in over 5 years. Story 76. Learning about number stations and the fact that even in the age of the internet, many are still active. Story 77. Christian Weston Chandler, also known as Chris Chan, creator of Sonichu and CWCville. I first heard of him on a radio show out in New York, and upon looking into his dedicated wiki, I realized he was a local. I met him and got a pic of him, which is now on the wiki, forever linking me to him. Story 78. One day my friend asked me, "You ever thought about playing Dungeons and Dragons? Fast forward 5 years, and I'm running a game for my friend, his girlfriend, and another friend. GF gets knocked out by stone golems, incapacitated for days. First friend is a shape changer who asked me what animal has the largest male body part. I Google proportional, mollusk, or size. Blue whale. Fast forward 5 hours, and I'm reading about the Argentinian blue-billed duck in their corkscrew in the female's reproductive tract that's designed as a maze to prevent fertilization. Fast forward 10 years, and I'm watching a live stream that gets sidetracked when a person with a master's degree in religion asks the panel, due to my comment in the chat, what's the evolutionary benefits of a corkscrew male body part? Story 79. The Elisa Lam case at the Cecil Hotel. I watched that elevator footage and then spent an entire night reading every single theory about what could have possibly happened. It's so chilling and tragic. Story 80. Stairs in the woods. Generally in great condition. They look like they belong in a house, but they're in the woods. Story 81. I got deep into reading about the past lives people claim they had. That's why I know it's completely wrong when someone trots out the, you can tell people are lying about past lives because everyone thinks they were rich and famous. No one claims to have been a dirt farmer argument. Because I read a lot of stories, and almost all of them were about lives no one would envy. Story 82. The Battle of the Atlantic during World War II. How the Germans had the upper hand, their happy time. Then with tactics like Primrose, weapons like the Hedgehog, and countermeasures like Asdiet, centimetric radar, and sonobuoys, they managed to turn it around. It was helped by the lack of raw materials on the Axis side too. 50 U-boats were lost to unexplained issues, but it is believed the steel used could not take the depths due to incorrect alloys. Story 83. There used to be a subreddit with videos of people dying in freak accidents or by tragic end, and it horrified me, but at the same time, I couldn't stop looking. I don't know what was wrong with me. Story 84. What all the Nazis who fled to the US, UK, France, Soviet Union, Canada, South America, Spain, and Egypt got up to. They got into a lot of fudge-up stuff, and arguably still are. Story 85. Watching lots of videos from 2 different schizophrenic YouTubers who each also accidentally had some good ASMR qualities to their voices and presentations. One was called The Groxt, then The Groxt 1, and later The Groxt Alpha Omega. The core of his content had a lot of the typical, the Illuminati or satanic, and here's all the signs and symbols they put right in front of us to tell us what's going on and what they're going to do type shoot. But what he also did a lot was pull up different places on Google Earth and then trace out really silly looking, childlike doodles on it, and then explain how these doodles represent the way the end of the world is going to play out. What really made me interested in him, though, is how peacefully relaxed he was in all of his videos explaining this shoot. Like, if you pictured the stereotypical screaming homeless man while reading my description of him, I wouldn't blame you a bit. But no, instead, he sounded like a really chill tour guide for nature walks, all while explaining nuclear holocaust in the Book of Revelations. Unfortunately, I haven't found anything made by him for at least 3 years now, so I can't help but wonder if he's dead now. The other one was Lord Stephen Christ, and he was way more interesting and insane. He claimed to be Jesus because of course he did, and his main topic was showing how the world and the whole universe as well were actually all concave. Like, we don't live on the earth, we live in the earth. And outer space? Well, actually, it's inner space, and all of inner space is contained in a glass ball above us, which is the center of the Earth and the universe. And when you watch the sunrise, you're actually watching the sunset, and vice versa. And most of his videos were explaining how this is possible despite literally everything that says otherwise. But as insane as he was, he also had an unbelievable knack for ASMR from both his voice and his drawing skills, which were also very good. To the point where it made me kind of sad sometimes that he clearly had real talent at drawing and grasping a lot of scientific concepts, only to have it all be upended and ruined by an illness I'm sure he couldn't really help. Unfortunately, Chris was also more on the stereotypically crazy side of things compared to the Groxt. He was put in prison back around 2010 for threatening to eliminate Obama, and then again in 2018 for threatening to eliminate Trump. Both threats, I think, were done because they wouldn't recognize my authority, because he's Jesus. And then back in 2020 or 2021, he died in prison from a respiratory infection. Story 86. When I was like 14 to 15, I was super into looking into paranormal videos and sites. It was like my final magic might be real fascination. I'd watch hours of footage and get duped into the analysis telling me that because of those pixels, there's no way this could be faked. It's a real ghost. And then going through the ideas of how, if ghosts are real, what are they? Are they literal spirits we all have that walk the earth after we die? Are they moments captured in time somehow? Are they people from other dimensions and timelines slipping through the universe? I grew out of it after exploring abandoned hospitals and such once I could drive, and also realizing that if a real ghost was ever captured on film, it would be talked about everywhere, and the modern world has too many cameras. There's no way there would be zero provable evidence at this point. I still like to go on ghost tours and explore abandoned haunted locations. I enjoy the atmosphere, even though I know there will never actually be a ghost. Story 87. Swirl Man, the guy who take down a child, and he uploaded a picture of himself with a swirl filter, and they had to unswirl it to reveal who he was. Story 88. In high school, the 911 was an inside job conspiracy. I have grown up. I don't necessarily believe that, but when a kook brings it up, I can't help but think about some of the peculiar points that were being made. Story 89. Trying to understand narcissism, as in people with narcissistic personality disorder. I've just always been around them, no matter where I go, all the while not being able to relate at all to their crazy thinking. I was raised by one and grew up asking why a lot. It turns out he was not as bad as it gets. Try getting jobs with more certifications than most people have, and they really come out. People you don't even know want to get you fired. And even weirder, many people are very susceptible to being flying monkeys. Basically, people who might have been nice, but are hardwired to be mindless sheep that narcissists can easily control. I imagine these are the people that are vulnerable to cults. My current job would be awesome if it wasn't for my narcissistic boss, who sometimes says he doesn't have empathy, etc. My research has really helped me understand their tactics. I suspect about 10 of everyone is a narcissist, and about 50 of everyone is a follower. Story 90. Richard Allen, Delphi, Indiana, convicted of take down 2 teen girls. Very strange case if anyone has time to go down that rabbit hole. I've followed it for the case for years and things don't add up. Story 91. Honestly, Wikipedia. Back when I was young, I just keep on clicking inline links of random topics. Before you knew it, what started as a nice evening was 3 a.m. and you were like, WTF. Story 92. Here's one. Through shoot interviews and podcasts, some of these have been confirmed as being true, possible, and some just downright silly. Good times. Story 93. The organization seeking highly intelligent individuals through puzzles. Mystery remains. Look up Cicada 3301. Story 94. Fudge Chris Chan. I'll never forget. Someone linked a video on here and I was like, let me see what this is about. It was one part of a 40-hour documentary, LOL. Story 95. Looked up where the name of a dog, George Banks, I was dog sitting, came from, Mary Poppins, but also found the name shared by someone who had committed a shooting spree in the 80s and was on passing row. 3 hours later, I was still exploring on deathpenaltyinfo.org. There's so much information on there about the history of execution, relevant news, moral issues, published research, current and past methods used, scheduled future executions, and even a database containing everyone on passing row and everyone who has been executed since 1976. I traipsed over to Wikipedia for a while too, but there's so much to learn on that website listed above. Warning, it may radicalize you. For anyone curious about George Banks, the murderer, he was scheduled to be executed in 2004, but eventually declared mentally incompetent for execution. He had long-standing delusions and paranoia of imminent race wars, and 5 of his 13 victims were his own children, in an attempt to protect them from suffering racial abuse. He spent the rest of his life in prison and actually died of cancer earlier this week. For anyone curious about George Banks, the dog, he was a pretty good boy, but not very affectionate, or rather did not like receiving affection. He snuggled up next to me while I was sleeping, and then growled at me when I instinctively pet him. Great at setting boundaries, that guy. For anyone curious about me, I was diagnosed with ADHD a few weeks after this hyper-focused rabbit hole. Story 96. Andrew WK is not a real persona as multiple people. And who the hell is Steve Mike? Also, I don't necessarily believe that it's true, but there is some very compelling evidence out there that Michael Jackson is the love child of Smokey Robinson and Diana Ross. Answer, not so fun fact. The day Michael Jackson had his accident and caught on fire was the day that he met the doctors that would supply him with the substances that eventually eliminate him. That day was the exact halfway point of his life, like to the day. Before the fire, he was just Michael Jackson, a dude that was probably pretty fudge up from his childhood but had not done anything fudge up to himself or anyone else yet. He starts on fire, gets hooked on substances, and destroys everything that was wonderful about him before, possibly harming others in the process. Story 97. Remember the Bundy Ranch, ranchers who let their cattle roam free onto other people's land, and it was interfering with the establishment of a prototype solar energy project, and it ended with some of the Bundys taking over a nature observatory and having to be stormed? I ended up reading about the solar project and found posted online company reports revealing the project was to be funded by tax dollars put into operation, then sold to big-name energy company bidders after a couple of years, IIRC. It was a complete scam. I ended up finding that there were some played-out mineral deposits on the Bundy property and wondered if the government had an interest in it, and that the endangered tortoises on that land were going to be gotten rid of to some extent, with some flippantly relocated. There's a lot more. This is my strong ADHD with autistic spectrum sprinklings at work. None of it ended up mattering at all. Party too hard time. Story 98. Cyrax no, not the Mortal Kombat character. If you look up Cyrax yes with 2 X's, you will find one of the worst things to ever terrorize the internet. Story 99. Terrariums. I spent hours watching people make them. It's cool, but I don't want to bring bugs into the house. Story 100. A frequent and insightful commenter at the Skeptical OB once mentioned having been in a cult, so I visited her website about it. So she was in a 2-person, sometimes 3-person cult where the leader believed themselves to be the reincarnation, avatar of Frodo Elijah Wood, and it kind of spiraled from there, including trying to host a fan convention to which at least a few Laudar actors showed up, but otherwise nothing was organized and was generally awful for everyone, and busking as Disney characters in LA, while being convinced that they were saving the world from destruction. And finally, the commenter extricated herself, and as of the last post, the cult leader had developed a new cult around the HP fanfic Dumbledore's Army with apparently a whole lot of vulnerable teenagers. So I'm sure that ended well. Story 101. When the internet was relatively new, I spent an entire day reading about ancient Mars civilizations, found some interesting websites, mostly sourced from Richard C. Hoagland. Story 102. Encyclopedia Dramatica was a rabbit hole I did not want to go in, but curiosity got the best of me anyway. Story 103. The Sailing Stones of Passing Valley. They're a bunch of stones that very, very slowly move around the desert, leaving cool tracks due to their weight pressing down on the dried mud of the desert. The mechanism of how they move is interesting in its own right. Basically, below freezing temperatures at night cause minute ice crystals to form, and any breeze moves the stone a tiny little bit as this happens, happening again and again every night, adding up to noticeable movement. They move the farthest in winter. The research that discovered all of this is kind of cute. In the 1970s, they decided to figure it out. So they labeled and carefully tracked the exact location of a few dozen of these stones every single day for years. They gave them names. At first it was Stone A, Stone B, etc. But as the researchers familiarized themselves with the stones, they began to use nicknames for each one instead. Mary, Susan, etc. One of the heaviest, 320 Kuanon, Karen, actually got lost at one point. Nobody could find her for a few years, despite how carefully everything was recorded, how heavy Karen was, and how few people frequented the inhospitable area. Plus, people, animals, and vehicles leave tracks in the dry mud, just as the stones famously do. So if someone came and hauled her away in a truck, there would be very clear signs. But no, she just vanished into thin air. How can a great big rock even get lost at all? The researchers were, adorably, really worried and upset until she reappeared later, safe and sound. It's still a mystery what happened to her, but she and the other stones are even more closely monitored now. Nowadays, the stones have GPSs attached and all sorts of fancy cameras to record the infinitesimal movements. But the stones are moving less, and there are concerns that climate change will cause them to ultimately become sedentary, like regular rocks. You can feel the sadness of the scientists involved when you read interviews that care so much about those rocks. The weirdest stuff by far is all the bonkers conspiracy theories. People think the stones are proof that aliens built the pyramid, that we're all in the Matrix, that invisible angels are basically playing a very slow soccer game, or that underneath there's a subterranean psychic training facility hidden by the government. Story 104. I found on an Odd Jobs website a request for someone who would be willing to submit fake responses for a survey. I collected a few clues to work out that the survey in question was likely a survey to change zoning laws for a park, and that the one who was requesting the changes was a development company. Sent an email to the surveyor in the group working to stop the park from being destroyed. Pretty fudge up. Story 105. Celebrity number 6. There was this fabric printed in the early 2000s with a bunch of celebrities' faces on it with kind of a pop art style edit. All of the celebrities were matched with the actual photo used for the edit, except one, celebrity number 6. It looked through old magazines whenever I came across them trying to find the face of the lady on the fabric. It took the subreddit our celebrity number 6 a few years, but finally someone figured out who she was. A foreign model, Letitia Sarda, and they contacted her to confirm. Story 106. Sovereign citizens. I watched the Darrell Brooks trial, and barely a week after the verdict, I get a letter at work, bank, from a client announcing she was detaching her personhood from her strawman. She went on to ask for proof that she was not both creditor and debtor. Fast forward to 3 a.m. and I am watching a YouTube video of a phone recording of someone explaining to the lawyer suing him what quantum grammar is, and realize I have to be up by 7 for work. Story 107. I have spent way too much time looking up court documents from my city and then searching up obituaries, FB, etc. from people involved in the case. Story 108. Grog, pirates, the Navy. Back to grog, scurvy, a brief and fascinating history of scurvy, and the discovery of vitamin C in the 70s by accident when research guinea pigs happened to get scurvy, which very few animals do. Story 109. Go to Pinterest, type in art tutorials, as well as unique fonts and male art models. Tie yourself to the mast. We're in for a typhoon, boys. My last image mining trip to Pinterest took me almost a month to get out of. At one point, I had over 100 tabs open at one time. No joke. Story 110. Magazine cruise. A girl showed up on my door, and after refusing to give her any money or buy anything that she was offering through Googling, I realized she was part of something I've never heard before, the magazine crew or mag crew. I don't know that I would say it's the deepest hole I ever went into, but I definitely spent the rest of the day poking around and understanding how crazy some of those situations can get in those crews. Story 111. I once spent hours diving into the world of unsolved mysteries and conspiracy theories. It started with one video, and before I knew it, I was deep in the rabbit hole of urban legends and secret societies. Story 112. I'd K if it's the deepest ever, but during COVID, I was bored like everyone else and joined a FB group called Investigation Connection, and someone posted that they were adopted and looking for their siblings. In another life, it'd be a PI, and COVID gave me plenty of time for internet sleuthing. I stayed up all night, but I found a girl's entire family. She had tried her entire life to find them. After COVID, she got to meet them and tag me in it. Pretty cool. Story 113. I was giving a speech at work and sat down on a chair that collapsed. It really embarrassed me. Spent the next month on the internet researching the company that made the chair to let them know about their faulty chairs. Long story short, it consumed my life. Story 114. I fell into a deep YouTube hole in 2006-ish about how G.W. Bush was going to declare martial law and shut down the government so there would be no elections and he could rule forever. I found out the same stories would be told about every president until one actually tries to do it. Story 115. The World Problem subs are extremely fun to spend even a short amount of time checking out. Follow the patterns in the post long enough, and you start questioning whether or not something much deeper was going on. Story 116. Locos. When you go to the very page that started all, you are like, yeah, makes sense, you are the way you are, like Taylor, Nicole Dean, Onishan, etc. Story 117. Mimi, ages 13-16, code my own virtual computer without using any libraries in C that can run 3D applications with its own bytecode and compiler. Story 118. I had a cousin who was really into QAnon. I was trying to talk him off that particular ledge. That's 3 weeks I'm never getting back. Story 119. TV tropes back in the day. Before you know what's happening, you've got 45 tabs open and you're reading about OLOT devices on obscure shows you loved as a kid. Story 120. Old broadcasts of the Opie and Anthony show from the 90s and 2000s. I must have listened to 20 years worth, 15 years worth of radio by now. Story 121. Young Earth creationists and their loony beliefs, a la the entire universe, has only been in existence for 10,000 years, and the hundreds of absolutely bizarre claims associated with their so-called faith. Story 122. Defenestrations through history. This was 15 years ago, but has become strangely topical in the last couple of years. Story 123. I got curious and started browsing the Warhammer 40,000 wiki, Lexicanum, some years ago. I'm a sucker for a good fiction wiki. 4 dozen Black Library novels later, and I'm still reading the wiki and finding new stuff. Only ever painted 2 army models. Story 124. Spent 4 hours researching info back and forth about the lawsuit between Marilyn Manson and Evan Rachel Wood before I came to the conclusion, 1. Until I know either one of them personally, there is no way for me to decide whose side I'm on. 2. If lawyers and other Manson fans across the globe can't figure out for sure what the story is by online research, why do I think I could? Story 120 fake. As a teen, I went on a very long, deep dive on school shootings and mostly Columbine. Then years later, I stumbled upon that TV Tropes website. My goodness. Story 126. Pick a random conspiracy theory. Start reading about it. People don't believe in science a bit. It's very likely to find books, articles, movies, or Discord servers. The internet really helped destroy all sorts of scientifically proven information, which is kind of sad. Story 127. Lost Germans in Passing Valley, or random ASD test in the literal middle of the night and subsequent self-diagnosis. New special interest LOL. Story 128. I once spent what felt like a whole week at work reading this one guy's blog posts about how he found the location where a German family disappeared in the middle of Passing Valley. The hunt for the Passing Valley Germans. Story 129. Not internet, but my family got really into watching sumo wrestling on the NHK Japan channel. We began talking about their strategies and weight classes, learned about the rituals involved with the game and the culture around it. It was really fun. One time, there was a young sumo going against someone about 100 kilograms heavier than him. We said, no way he's gonna win. He just entered the championship, has no wins, and is so small, but he won. He became our favorite. We kept track of how he progressed through the season. I wish I could remember his name. Story 130. I surfed the dark web for about 2 hours and saw some really fudge up shoot. I'm never going there again. Story 131. I dove into 2 that were fascinating. One was about the origins of furries within internet culture, and the other was about cut content in video games. Started with Twilight Princess and Team Fortress 2, and ended with some obscure PC games I'd never played. You'd be surprised how deep these topics actually go. Story 132. A .net site about the history of my town. It took me several hours, but I read every page on that site and learned a ton. Looked it up a couple weeks ago, and it doesn't exist anymore. Story 133. Taosim. Not even sure how it started, but next thing I knew, I had spent hours reading through translated texts. Story 134. Thea's Andrew WK. Actually real? Rabbit Hole is a fudge wild ride made even more rabbit holey by most of the websites actively investigating it, being from like the dawn of the internet, ad-infested hellhole sites that are not mobile friendly and constantly reload. 1010 though would recommend it. Story 135. I found the addresses of 2 of the dancing Israelis. I never saved the info, but they both lived in California. This was probably 10 years ago. Story 136. World religions and languages. By the time I got as deep as I did, I pretty much had to start over because I started backtracking to figure out geographic expansion and ones that had desolated. At that point, I realized I'd only scratched the surface. Could probably start again and this time dig the hole a bit deeper, but the takeaway already stuck. Story 137. Man-eating animals, then the famous hunters that eliminate them. There was this man eating jaguar in the 1920s that learned how to tear into the tops of straw huts and attack and eat people. I think it eliminated and ate a couple dozen people. Jim Corbett faced off with the thing, and it took multiple shots from a rifle to take it down. It nearly eliminated Jim. There was also this WW1 Nile croc that was something like 25 feet long that was eating live and dead soldiers alike. There are multiple accounts of people shooting it with all kinds of different weapons, but no confirmed eliminate. This leads a lot of people to consider the possibility that it's still out alive there. Story 138. There was a guy who posted chapters of his book on our writing. They were always just super wild, and he talked about things that were bonkers. I ended up going through his profile, seeing him get more and more delusional. I check him out every single day until finally he stopped posting. Then out of nowhere, like 6 months later, I see him comment on something and it's some bonkers shoot again. I said something like, "Hey dude, did you recently stop taking your meds or just get out of the hospital?" He PM'd me thinking I was some government psyop or how I knew he stopped taking his meds. I told him no, I followed his Reddit account, and I think he might be in the midst of having another episode. He stopped posting again. I eventually deleted that account, so I can't even check since I forgot his username. I hope he's still on his medication. Story 139. Feral children. Incredible how much of our abilities have to be learned from other people in a short time frame. Specifically, how having language has such a huge impact on our ability to think as humans. Story 140. Polyphasic sleep, especially Steve Pavlina's blog. Staying up into the wee hours with work the next day, reading about a guy eliminated on 2 hours a day. Story 141. How humans are capable of things, thought impossible things that defy the laws of physics. Furthermore, how the government people in power know what a person is capable of, so they prevent it from becoming public knowledge. Story 142. When I was working as a writer, I was covering topics related to prisoners in the USA and their rights. Think whether they can receive mail, marry in prison, etc. One of the topics specifically was dating pen pal apps for prisoners, and there were several websites I was supposed to explore. It turned out, I didn't really know this as I'm not American, that they actually have their profiles with pictures, their likes and dislikes, dating preferences, etc. So people can choose a prisoner and write them letters, potentially date them. You could also see what crime they committed. And well, I started scrolling and checking out each and every profile, guessing what crime a person committed before I check it. Niall, it was fun. I almost chose a pen pal myself, LOL. Another time, I somehow ended up on the website of a particular Texas prison where there was the entire list of all the prisoners on passing row from 1950s until now. For every person, you could see the entire file. Reports about the crime, description of what they did, their last meals, last wishes, and last words. As interesting as it was also so fudge depressing. And my masochistic self spent hours looking at these reports. I even forgot why I was exploring in the first place, LMAO. That's it for this video. Don't forget to support Vancher and my second channel, Vanchus. See you soon.